I'm going to call to order a special joint meeting of the Wellington Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen. It is Monday, February 27th at 6:35 p.m. I'll let the record show that all three selectmen are present in person.
Erica,
Yeah.
if I may, I'd like to make a motion just to move up present to speak to after the Pledge of Allegiance.
So it's a special meeting, so the agenda is set. I don't know that we would change.
I know that you
So-
cannot add topics and all that, and I'm just inquiring about the
Yeah.
order of the.
I don't believe, I'm looking to our town clerk, I don't believe we can change anything.
You can't change the ordering of.
I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, it's a special meeting, you know, I don't know.
Right, and it's a very specific agenda with very
I'm
specific
just
business,
noticing
which
lots
is
of
why.
people in the audience and online, so.
I would only worry that if people are coming later into the meeting, maybe driving home from work, hoping to get present to speak, if we do it now, it won't be available for them
So
later.
I will say it was, you know, we've set the agenda. I'm hearing our town clerk say it's not advisable. I would not.
Well, Mike has a valid, very valid point, especially because it's a special meeting, you can't add anything. So
Right,
I
so we
would-
Right.
can't do it
You
later.
can't add it to the
Right.
consent agenda.
But what he's
Right.
saying is that people are saying, oh, the person's speaking at the end. I
Right.
wouldn't recommend it.
Steph, do you want to?
Yes, and calling to order also the Board of Finance, all six members are in attendance in the room.
All right, so I'll ask you all to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right,
May I ask
we
one
do,
point of order question, since this is,
yes,
So we basically have two boards.
Yes.
for us. So the three, the board of selectmen can make, do we make motions together or separate? That's-
so the agenda is set so that there are two items that would be for all, which is the presentation and then a discussion of that can be joint, and then the remaining four action items are specific to the board. So you see it's set up, there are two items where the Board of Finance will discuss and potentially make motions, and then the Board of Selectmen. So items 3 and 4 can be joint discussion. All right, so the next item is presentation of the new school project by the School Building Committee. So Mike McCoo is chair of the School Building Committee, and our superintendent, Phil Stevens, are both here and have a presentation they're going to share. Mike, the floor is yours.
thank you, everybody. Most of you, not everybody, but most of the people sitting here have seen this already. So what I'm gonna do this time is I'm gonna just go through it. And a quick re-presentation of it, and it'll be the first time for Jim, I think, to see it officially. And then, so if you have questions, write them down or hold them until the end, so we can just kind of get through it. When we did the previous presentation, it took about 2.5 hours with question and answer, and I think we want to be a little more, we want to get to that faster by getting through this part first, I mean, so. So obviously, here we are talking about the potential project. And again, just a pointer, the image you see on the screen there is a concept. It's a fit study. And it is based on a couple of strong guesses, but not guaranteed. Like the strong guess that that would be the location on the proposed property where it would sit. For a lot of reasons, the level of the property, the buffer to the neighbors, setback from the road, things like that. The shape of the school building is not particularly indicative of anything right now. It's just basically the amount of square feet that we would be talking about represented to show that it fits on the site. A couple key factors. You'll notice separate bus and student drop-off lanes. That's been a topic of a lot of conversation, concern in town for safety reasons. This is configured to allow for that. So again, we'll move to the next slide and get into some more details about the project. I don't necessarily think we need to go through every bullet here, but again, at the end, if you have questions, just in quick overview, the school building committee's job was to recommend a pre-K through 8 solution, and essentially in a single building. And so we spent a lot of time over the last 2 years looking at ideas, getting public input through multiple different methods, and came to the point at the beginning of February of voting on a recommendation to build a new school on a new site with the option of adding the auditorium. Again, getting this to the public, so the public would make the decisions on it. But that's the recommendation based on the charge of the committee. The committee has not completed all of its charges. Some of them can't be completed until later on if the process continues. Some of them would be irrelevant if the voters vote not to do this. So there is a lot of discussion about, you know, have we completed charge items such as figuring out what we're going to do with the old buildings if this goes forward? No, we have not. If this doesn't go forward, that work on those things doesn't need to be done. If it does go forward, there'll be time then to start that planning process. It's not to say that we're ignoring that. It's just not the focus of the energy of the committee right now. Obviously, there are a lot of values to building a new building. Some of the highlights are here, certainly addressing code issues, getting into a completely new facility that meets all of not only the space standards, but is fully ADA compliant, allows room for potential future expansion. Keep in mind, the square footage design is derived basically from a enrollment study that shows us at a peak of 419 students over the next 8 years. Based on the state's formula, we can only design somewhere around that. We have to use that as some of the basis because it connects with the reimbursement formula and all that. We have had almost 800 students at the peak of the Wilmington schools that we see familiar, recent records of over the last 4 or 5 decades. We don't particularly see imminent information that we're going to go back up to almost 800 students, but there's certainly the chance beyond the 8-year study that we'll still be using the building, right? And so the ability to expand if enrollment does creep up over time is part of the consideration. There's been a lot of talk about natural light into the building. A lot of the spaces in the current hall school just simply don't allow that. The way it's constructed, sort of in layers over, floors over each other, cut into the hillside. And obviously, unfortunately, school security is a major factor these days, and this would allow the opportunity to build a lot more security features into the building itself. So those are some of the highlights. I hit a little bit a moment ago on the state grant requirements. You can see the bullets here. The state's encouraging municipalities to consolidate. They have made the comments directly to Wilmington that they are not likely to support a 2-school solution with an enrollment as small as ours. They don't see it as a good use of the taxpayer money to support grant reimbursement for that small amount in 2 schools. They would certainly, if we were in the previous discussions before this committee, we're talking about doing capital projects on the schools. There was still certainly the opportunity to apply for reimbursement as 2 separate schools in the area of doing capital projects, but not for a full renovation project in 2 schools. You can see there's a couple of issues that we've talked about a lot that are very specific about this project, where the formula that the state uses is essentially square footage times the amount of students. I'm simplifying it, obviously. And that comes out to 57,654 square feet. If you take the educational specification, which is also derived from state formulas and state guidance, and you apply the programs that Wilmington already is currently delivering, when you do that math and figure out the spaces, you come out to just over 80,000 square feet. So the delta, or the difference between the 57,654 and the 80-some thousand, it can potentially be a penalty in how the formula works with the state. And so that reduces our reimbursement rate. And that's why you hear a lot of discussion about the waiver, the space waiver. The space waiver is where we say to the state, and we've had the discussion already in concept. It's where we say to the state, okay, we've applied for reimbursement and we're asking for a waiver because your formula doesn't work for small schools. As I've talked about before, when you have a small population, you start getting into a place where the numbers don't make sense. A hallway is a certain size, whether it has 400 kids or 500 kids in it maybe. So when you have 400 kids, you're dividing that same size hallway space or the same size laboratory space amongst fewer students. Certainly if, you know, like just pick those sample numbers, maybe it's at 501, the hallway has to get bigger, and 501, maybe the bathrooms have to get bigger, but in that space in between, you have essentially a declining, you decline in this formula because the less people is the less square feet, but you can't reduce the space. You can't make a hallway that narrow or whatever. So that's, again, oversimplification, but that's the challenge with the space formula. The state realizes it doesn't work for us. The prospects are good, but absolutely not guaranteed that we'll get the waiver. Historically, towns in our situation have gotten the waivers. Our consultant feels that our chances are very good at getting the waiver. That would change our reimbursement amount quite a bit if we get the waiver. That's why you're hearing us talking about multiple different numbers. There's essentially 4 numbers: school and school auditorium, and then school with the waiver, and school auditorium with the waiver. Those are essentially the 4 different numbers we're talking about. Go ahead, Phil. We've talked a lot from the beginning of this process about the operating cost savings. And in all our conversations recently, we're trying to keep the operating cost savings separate from the capital conversation, because the funding package, the tax impact we've been talking about with the public is based on the capital project, the construction, basically. The operating savings will certainly be a savings within the town's budget, but it's sort of on the other side. So we've tried to keep that from muddying the waters. And you can see that that's estimated right now at 522, I can't quite read it from here, 532.
You put it in a color I can't see.
Just for you.
Yeah, thanks.
So you would not see that necessarily when you're looking at the cost of the project and the construction, you wouldn't see that number right there, but you would see it within the town's budget, because that would change what's happening with the Board of Ed budget request. Go ahead, Phil. This is another area here there's been a lot of discussion about. This is the list of the projects that were identified in the Fryer report back in 2017, right? There are projects, capital, maybe deferred maintenance, larger projects to get the buildings up to sort of a level set. The dollars have been adjusted over the years. Right now, the dollars in red are projected at the year 2025. And this is the stuff that's talked about a lot in a comparison of, well, if we don't do this new school project, then we can just spend this, which is only a third, and solve the problem. This 1/3 cost would get the buildings up to a certain state. It would not solve all the problems, and the buildings would still be 100-year-old buildings and 60-year-old buildings and different sections of different ages. That's part of the reason that this is not a complete picture. It's not a trade-off of either $19 million or $60 million or whatever the numbers are. It's $19 million to get back to a reasonable condition. And then the next day you would have new capital projects coming in, because they would still be old buildings, and you still would not have full ADA compliance. You would still not have the ventilation in every single room that would be provided in a new school.
Can I just ask one thing
Yes.
about this? This is an assumption too, that this is all done in 1 year. So that's important, because if it's not done in 1 year and you do it in, we'll say $5 million chunks, every year the costs increase. And so,
Right, there would be project management costs spread out by doing it. There would be essentially, like, if you were gonna bond each time or borrow each time, there would be fees for new bonding and borrowing. Like I said, there'd be project management, and there would be escalation over those years. So this is what I was talking about before. It's essentially the 2 different projects and then mixing in the options of waiver or not waiver. The top line, option one, that's new school without the auditorium. As you carry it across, you see the project cost, and then you see a reimbursement factor without the waiver. And then that leads to an estimated cost to the taxpayers. So that's where, of the four numbers you're seeing floating around out there, that's where that $36 million figure is calculated from, that particular combination of facts. If you then move to the next box to the right, same project, but with the waiver. You can see, obviously, it changes the reimbursement rate. That is the maximum reimbursement rate the state will pay on a new construction project, 53.21% for Wellington. There are variations across the state on what you can get. So the last box on that top row is then what the cost is to the taxpayers if the waiver is approved. That's another one of those four numbers you're seeing in town. Now you go to the bottom line, same concept, except this is the new school with the auditorium. So you add about $6 million to the construction cost, the project cost. And then you look at reimbursement without the waiver, leading to the $43 million cost. So this is the one that we're calling essentially the worst case scenario. It's the most expensive project with the least amount of reimbursement. And then you move to the next two columns and you have the same project, school and auditorium, with the waiver and the reduced amount. That's the fourth number that you're seeing in the, like if you've gone to use the online tax calculator to see the four different scenarios. And also I'll note on there, if you go back to the percentages, you'll see in the third column over, the two projects running up and down without the waiver, you can see what happens with the percentages without the waiver. You're down to 40-some% and 30-some% reimbursement. Also, just a quick note in review, you can't just apply the reimbursement directly to the whole project cost because certain things are ineligible for the reimbursement. So the formula that's behind these numbers is more complicated than project times percentage equals an answer. We talked about this at the Board of Finance meeting. The second column down there highlighted in yellow is what the town is allowed to borrow. That's the debt borrowing limit for school construction. And then I think that $59 million. In a way.
59.6.
Yeah, $59.6 million. All right, next. Timeline, obviously tonight, here we are in this timeline right here. As we work through this process, if everything is completed tonight that's on the agenda and moves forward, then that allows us to get to the point where we get the full impact of the public involvement at town meeting and then referendum. So again, these are the four numbers we were just talking about, the four scenarios. The green segment is the highest, which was the full project and auditorium without the waiver. And then you work your way across the different colored sections represent all the numbers for that particular cost to the taxpayers. The yellow box in the top, sort of to the left there, is where the public online is entering in their assessment value of their homes or property. And then the math carries out across the form and shows you what your tax impact is, what is added to your tax bill. An important thing I want to point out, a few people have emailed into the SBC email box with either misunderstandings or questions or having been given the incorrect information and thinking their taxes are going to go up 2 times or 3 times. That is absolutely not the case. In the what I was calling the worst case scenario, the left block with the green header on it, the most expensive project with the least amount of reimbursement, the maximum tax impact is about 32% in the highest year of this, which is like the 3rd year into the project, into the funding. The 3rd or 4th year, you have the highest amount. And so in this case, on a $100,000 house, it's showing a $1,000 raise in the taxes over what they currently are today without the project. So just as if you're going to buy a new car you would normally get payments that are flat across all the time you're paying for the car. In this case, we have a steep climb, and then we have a long, slow decline over the 20 years. That peak year would be a 32% increase in the worst case scenario. All the way to the right, in the best case scenario, it would be about a 21% increase on your taxes on that peak year. So nowhere ever do we get to like 2 times or 3 times your taxes.
What's the mill? I'm sorry, there's no way.
It's what's on that sheet you have in front of you. That's.
Okay.
Oh, they have it in front of them too.
No, I don't know.
No, this is a different sheet.
Oh, I don't know. what-
Okay.
I thought this was that sheet, that's why I picked it up.
So the highest mill in the worst case scenario is 41.45.
The increase over, don't you have the increase over what was projected?
10.2 mil increase.
Yeah, that's the number I'm looking for.
That's the number you're looking for, 10.2 on the
and-
worst case, and in the best case, it is 7.
7.
Mike,
Yes,
want clarity on that? That is an increase over whatever the mill rate is on
Right.
any particular year.
Correct. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Rob.
That's the last slide.
so that's the last slide, okay. So, then there were a couple of points I just want to throw in based on feedback over the last couple of weeks, emails and questions from the public. I already hit the highest year varies from 21 to 32% increase. We talked about the escalation of the projects, if they're pieced out over the years. There's a lot of discussion about CIP and how to look at the capital plan over the 5 years of the capital plan. And this is always a challenge in capital planning and for us for the Board of Finance in my years there is what you look at for years 2 through 5. The fact of the matter is they're really critical years for planning, but those are not commitments except for something we've already engaged in. If we've purchased something and it has a payment, then obviously that carries through the years of CIP, but all of the other projects that are in the CIP plan that are new for like, say, year 2 or year 4, as an example, would then have to get approved into that year. So what we're funding in the CIP plan that's gonna come before the public this budget season will be year 1, which is the year starting this coming July 1. So that is a known. We can factor that into our thoughts going forward. Years 2 through 5, we can certainly think about those, but those numbers don't yet apply to any forecast because we don't know if they'll be approved. And often years 2 through 5 get moved around, they go up and down. And particularly that was communicated multiple times. What if if the town also decides to build fire stations, they're in the CIP plan, what effect is that gonna have on the mill rate or the taxes? Well, we don't know, 1, because we don't know what they'll cost, and we don't know, number 2, because we don't know if they'll be approved. They're in there for planning purposes, but they are not a commitment at this time. We do know what we're gonna pay for the library through 2027, because that's already committed. That carries in the top lines of CIP. That's a commitment that will affect the budget every year until it's paid off. Is the tax planning tools, the one you saw on the screen, that's the one that's available online. It's a very simplified tool because it only factors in the cost of this project. As I've said before, in the example of buying a car, the school building committee, through the work of the finance office and bond counsel and the financial planner and a bunch of other people, have been able to put together a cost projection. Essentially, if you buy this car, if the taxpayers decide to buy this car or this house, this is what their mortgage is going to be over the time. We had to try to insert some other numbers in early on, which ended up creating confusion because they were only part of the picture. What we all really want is a crystal ball. There is no crystal ball. Now, a member of the SBC did make a tool that would be the mathematical version of the crystal ball of sorts. The problem is we don't know what numbers to put into it. We can put a lot of different numbers and it does amazing math. So the SBC has stuck with this simple format because it's the thing that we can control. It's the knowns. We know what this project will do to the taxes. The rest of it kind of has to be figured out or assumed. or played around with, with different people's minds and stuff, but we can only tell you what this project will cost. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Questions?
So
You want to-
we'll let you relax. Pete?
I have a question. I have a number of questions. First question I have is where do we find that calculator online?
If you go to the town webpage,
All
right on the very front, the main front webpage of the town, where you might go looking for agendas and all that stuff, it's right on that front screen. Yep.
Thank you. That's,
Donna, can I ask you to speak in that presentation? It was up to the date information when the presentation was first made. You received new information today that speaks to the town's ability to borrow.
Yes.
Can you
every
share
year.
that? Yes.
Yes, every year. It is a schedule in the town audit report. And the town audit report for FY 22 is going to be released tomorrow. So there's a new schedule and the debt limit is changing from 59 million to, I think it is 61 million,
I think it's 62.
62.
I thought it was 61 and some change,
I
61,
thought it was
966.
61.9.
Yeah,
but,
that's what I
Oh, okay.
You know, I think. Steph has it in
61.9.
front of her.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
defer.
I think it's good to, just to note that our, if it had gone down, we need to know that too. That would need to be part of this conversation. So the information, again, in the presentation was accurate at that date. Donna received new information today that will be released tomorrow. So the project is still within the town's ability to borrow. Pete?
the second part of my question on the website was, I had contacted you after the last presentation that like you likened this to buying a car and these are our monthly payments. And I asked you if there was gonna be a line there with total payments. Has that been adjusted? I mean, total cost, bottom line, adding up to 20 lines.
No, we didn't
I'll
have
give you
it.
that. You give me,
I have the numbers.
we can tell you, and I'll give you each a printout. I apologize. It was supposed to be on the table and I have only missed filling this sheet and this sheet. Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's for $100,000 assessment?
No,
Okay.
no,
just-
that's for the borrowing.
All right, that
So
doesn't.
you want to
answer
know
my
what it would
question.
cost an
It's 100,000.
individual on 100,000.
Right.
So
if
here's
you
what I can
plug in
tell you. I
100,000
can give you an answer.
All right,
I only did the math on 135,000 because that is the average assessment.
all right,
The cost over the entire 20 years for the best case scenario
yeah,
is $13,820. And that was that 21%
right,
that, this is assuming I did my math right, because I think math is somewhat magical.
yes,
And the worst case scenario, school plus the auditorium with no waiver.
Yeah.
Would be $21,000 over the full 20 years.
all right.
That would be the total tax, the total cost in taxes.
If I could, Phil, in your, and Mike, in your presentation, this might be more a question to Phil, the avoidance, if you will. That number had a number of projects out of the 2017 prior study that do not qualify for reimbursement, is that correct? And so if I looked at that slide correctly, that was the cost after reimbursement to the town share. I believe there were some questions about some statements that were made in previous meetings, and I just wanted to clear up that number actually, as best we know, with escalation, but it does include the reimbursement rate.
19 million is local share after reimbursement has already been applied.
So to Mike's analogy, that the comparison is not to the 62 million, it's really to the after reimbursement rate. So you said it's a third. of the
Yeah,
cost.
I misrepresented that a minute ago when I did the thing. I was thinking the reimbursement applied to some of that 19 million. You're saying that 19 million is after reimbursement.
Already been.
Okay,
Could you put that?
Thank you
slide
for
up for me again?
clarifying
I just want, so that people can see, I want to make sure we're accurately portraying that number, that there were before reimbursement costs and after already in this,
understood.
in this slide, and so his total shows both.
So really then the way to compare that number, that $19 million number would be compare it to the 4 different funding,
Total cost.
total cost to taxpayer amounts that are at the top of those 4 colored areas.
So for
Yeah, you can-
instance, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, you can see the total project cost line for each of these. One, and this is a short list. It's a
Yes.
very abbreviated list. So one is for hall, and one is for center. And so when you see total project cost, that's for one of the buildings. And then it says local share, that's after the reimbursement has been applied. And very few projects qualify for reimbursement when you do the individual projects.
So I think there had been some confusion as to comments that were made in, again, one of the traveling roadshow Bill did, and saying that using $11 million. And so the $11 million was closer to the local share in the
Right.
hall school. I believe the bottom one is the hall school.
Yes.
After reimbursement. So 11 million prior to reimbursement, that was just one school, not the total. I think some folks thought that it was the entire project, that this 18 million, including these 3 items, the center school, hall school, and then any CIP within the last 5 years, would then be subject to that reimbursement rate, and that is not the case. So I think that's just important for folks to note. What you just got a copy of, just so that you're aware, and we're moving forward and making potential decisions, is the way the bonding has been presented to you has been in a 20-year bond in 4 scenarios. So that's the sheet with just the 4 columns, like simplified, and you can see the cost of borrowing and the total cost of that debt. So scenario 1 is best case scenario, no auditorium, and I shouldn't say best case scenario, the least expensive. Full waiver, no auditorium. We would be bonding $28.7 million. The interest would be just over 19 million for total debt service of $47.787 million. And you can see those payments. This is what has come in after initial conversations with our business manager and our financial advisor, and I'll let Donna jump in anytime she wants. It started with the more complex sheet you see, where we were using the scenarios in the beginning, whether we would use level principal or level debt, and this was built on a 30-year bond. And you can see very quickly that a 30-year bond, this may still be the 20-year bond in front of you, but it showed level principal and level debt. We started with a 30-year bond scenario. And in some of these more expensive cases, we were paying more interest than we were borrowing. And it became very evident that that was not the most advantageous way for us to go. So we moved to a 20-year bond schedule after working again with our financial advisor and our business manager, and the recommendation has been for level principal. So that's what you see here, kind of drilled down. So lots of discussions gone into it, but you can see what the payments would be in each one year over year. These are the numbers that were used in the tax implicator tool that the SBC developed. They came right from this worksheet. So our recommendation would be to go with a 20-year bond, and the notes associated with the project is built upon 3 notes and a bond. Those notes are built based on the cash flow of the project, so the dollars that are needed at different levels of construction. So they would all begin with a $2.5 million note. That's not true, one with a $2.7 million note, because that project needed a little bit more in the beginning than the others. And so I think it's important that we all see what the total cost of the town would be. Right, so this is, an open discussion for us on the recommendation from the SBC and the project before we go into any potential actions. Comments, questions?
I've done a lot of commenting, so if
Yeah.
people have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Do we have the updated grand list by any chance?
No.
Oh,
I know it would be nice. No, oh my gosh. Looking diligently tomorrow. Right, yeah. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, the decision to go with the level principal. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Donna, you want to speak to that? The decision to go with level principal over level debt.
Yes, basically, the interest that you pay is less with level principal.
Good size summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And historically, that is the direction the town has gone with.
Okay.
I have a question.
Millions, yes.
So we're looking at a potential operating reduction with the new school of about $530,000. Does that change anything when we walk into the new building as far as the budget from the school board? So let's say right now their budgets, I'm just gonna use $10 million, and we can never go below that $10 million. However, if their operating cost reduces by $500,000, can we reduce that number now moving into a new building?
When you
Yeah.
move into new building, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the, there are a couple of things that kind of reset your MBR. I think you're talking about the minimum budget requirement.
Correct.
That
Thank
is
you,
one of
thank you.
the
I wasn't sure of
things.
the terminology.
And I'll let Phil jump in if I speak incorrectly, but yes, the consolidation of the school and that new school would then trigger a reset of that. And so there's been much discussion back and forth between the superintendent and I, and even like whether or not that number is into this cost, but the SBC decided it was best to keep the cost of the building project separate, standalone, and not include that, but they would see, potentially could see a $500,000 savings on their operating budget in that first year. Yes, it would change their MBR and then change the amount of spending.
Right, I just want to help the taxpayer if we can.
Absolutely. And I think the Board of Ed would look at that too. I think some of the caution is those decisions are decisions that are made at the Board of Ed. So while the superintendent might make those recommendations, I think those are the best way to go. We don't know what would happen within our schools between now and that time to say, yes, this is a definitive number,
Sure.
but it's probably pretty close.
And if there were
After that-
savings, it would be in the first year of the bond. It would not, if it passed, it would not be in the first note. Because you wouldn't see those savings or any savings until you moved into that building.
Right.
That's the year
Correct.
you would see the savings.
You're correct.
Yeah.
I just want to go back very quickly to the last question about level debt versus level principal. The answer to that question is right on the sheet with, that has the 8 terms, and you
You
can
can see the ones I crossed out.
the ones that are crossed out, you can see right next to the one, you have level principal to the left of the crossed out one. And so you look at the bottom number, you can see the difference. If you're looking at the $43 million scenario we were talking about, the highest one, you're talking about a $6 million, like following the columns right here.
Yes.
You're talking about a $6 million increase if you use level debt instead of level principal. 6 million on a $43 million, so that's, I'm not real fast with that, but it's over 10%.
Yes. Comments, questions on the project?
Yeah, I have,
Kate?
so one of the reasons, Mike, that I asked you for that total cost at the end is that it looks to me like in the best case scenario, at $135,000 assessed, the best case scenario, you told me 13,820. That's approximately, that means the ask of the taxpayer over 20 years is 10% of the excess value of their property.
Over the 20 years.
Over 20 years,
Yeah.
but nobody pays off their mortgage in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years anymore anyway, so that it's like taking 10% of the value, asking them for 10% of the assessed value of their land. So under the worst case scenario, I come up with 15.5%, and I just think that's an awfully big ask. That's my only comment.
There's no question this is expensive. There's no question. And I'm not trivializing at all. There's no question it's expensive, but everything that the taxpayers get for their tax dollar is expensive.
Mhm.
You know, you do get a school from it.
Right,
You don't
oh,
just-
no, I'm not.
Right, you get a school.
Yeah,
from it.
I know they're not giving me, they're selling me a school for 10% of the assessed value of my land.
the use of it anyway.
Yeah, well, they're not even me, but, you know, because
Society.
society.
Yeah, right.
I
So
think,
you could be selling your repairs for 7% of the assessed value, which still leaves you with a 100-year-old building.
Yeah.
Which is.
True.
big
Only part of
takeaway.
it's not being sold.
only a part of it,
Only
I
part
think,
of it's not.
Correct, the other part of it is 60.
43.
No.
like me.
43.
A spring chicken.
I get that, but after about 30 years, you know, your.
We're gonna build it
replacement cost
again.
Outweighs, you know,
And-
outweighs repair generally.
And the other
Could you-
thing I'm thinking
I'm
about.
sorry.
Can we just
Talk-
wait,
sorry.
wait, just one.
Could you make that last point again?
So, you know, when you talk about long-term, yes, you want these buildings to last as long as they can, and All has done a remarkable job of serving the community well for a long time, but once you get about, you know, the OSCGR wants to make sure that you're gonna be in that building for the life of the bond at a minimum, until it's paid off. The reality is, once you get beyond 20, 30 years, the long-term replacement cost of systems and components generally start to outweigh the cost of building new, which is exactly what we're seeing here. You know, whereas a building may last 50 years, you're gonna put a ton of money into it after 30, after 40, because you have large systems like we're seeing at Hall, where you need ventilation, where it needs heating upgrades, it needs insulation, roof replacement, reporting of masonry, asbestos, whatever. I don't think we have asbestos, I'm not gonna go there, sorry, but who the hell knows, we do, if it is, it's encapsulated, whatever. You know, so it becomes, it's like going back to his new car analogy, you know, we're in the market for a van that fits the whole family. But we have two Honda Civics with 200,000 miles on it that need a substantial amount of repair. And, you know, I just, and that's at best case scenario. Because you're not gonna know what the repairs are gonna cost till I get in there and do it, where we find unforeseen conditions, et cetera. So in my right mind, I would never, if you take a lot of zeros out of the equation, we're paying 28 to 35 million best case scenario for a new van. We're paying 19 million for repairing two Honda Civics with 200,000 miles on it. Looks great, look at them running, but they're still gonna need more repairs. So I just don't see how, in that analogy, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. But
So,
No, if I can. So I think it's important to note, this conversation has gotten to this point after over a decade, because the Board of Education began a discussion of how do we mitigate our lowering enrollment and our increasing operating costs. And the answer to that was to get into one building. With the number of students we have in two buildings, it was extremely expensive. That's where the discussion came from. I think that's important to know. And the SBC looked at the cost of staying at Hall School or versus a new school and determined they thought the best outcome was a new school. When we talk about the potential $19 million, because I think that number is, I think it's low. And I think it's low because I think it's unrealistic to get it done in one summer, and it was based upon being done in one time. And that does not ever address the operating budget increases that are gonna come from having 200 or less students in a building. That we never address that. And so our operating costs are going to continue to increase. And so I think we're not comparing apples to apples with either we just do some repairs, but what's before us tonight is not to do repairs. It's whether or not there's recommendations and move to a referendum for all of the taxpayers to have a say in this. I've spent probably 12 years between the Board of Education and Board of Selectmen talking about this very topic. I think taxpayers are tired of hearing us talk about the topic, and I'm interested to get their vote. We only heard from about 300 people over the course of many months and 2 years of the school building committee, many months of public presentations. And the ultimate goal here, I think, is to put an item that I think is a expensive. It's an extremely expensive. You can't hide the fact that it's expensive for everyone, but a realistic project before the taxpayers, our legislative body, and giving them the ultimate say. And I think that's important that we are clear in how we got here, why we're here, and that are we willing to give taxpayers a vote in this? Or are, the 11 of us gonna decide for them? No, okay, there's 2 alternates missing, so there's 9 of us, maybe they're online. These 2 boards decide, no, you don't actually get to have a say, we're gonna make the say for you. This is putting forth a vote to, oh, now we're at 10, look at that. To taxpayers, but that scenario of not doing this project does not ever address the issue, and we're going to continue to see increasing costs in 2 buildings. It's just not financially prudent to educate in such a small number. So I wanted to make sure we're clear on that. Pete?
First, I want to say, James, I think you're absolutely right, that once you get past a certain point, that the upkeep is very expensive. I also think that this is a project that is so expensive that it's destroying a lot of our other opportunity costs. We have a fire station right up here that's 60, 80 years old. We have another one that was designed to last 20 years, it's 30 years old. We have increasing opportunity, and the opportunity to change those decreases with this project. And to your point on how long Board of Ed has been working on this, I fully appreciate that. Don't even begin to think that I don't. I just think that the Board of Education and the School Building Committee are very worried about education and the school building, and that may blind them to some of the other needs. That's the only indication I have. And as you say, put it in front of the voters. The last couple meetings we've been to, I've very carefully read the charge to the town, because I had the opportunity to moderate and read that. And it says, upon the recommendation of the Board of Finance, not the Board of Finance is allowing you to make your own decisions because we've abdicated our responsibility. So I think that what we really do need to do is to consider what's in front of us. We can't just say, here you go. That's my feeling now.
I think the main thing is that there's a lot of obligations the town has, and people kind of touched on those, not only the schools and but there's the capital for the roads and the buildings and the firehouses and trucks and all that. And you see the bonds and the notes, construction notes, and then the bonds all put into our capital plan, and it can't work beyond year 1. I mean, I'm glad it worked in year 1, but what about year 2, 3, 4, 5? It just does not work. That's a major problem in my mind. I don't know how you're gonna do that. I mean,
And I think, Jim, that's when it comes down to the voters weighing in on what they think has the greatest benefit for the town at large. I mean, there's so many things that have been discussed in this period of time, and there's quality of life stuff that goes on with improving the quality of education, and everything from that to how long is their kid going to be on a bus, and what if we don't do this? Does it push us more into regionalization, which I personally believe it does? And then the bus rides are longer. The kids, there's in a family with kids that cross from grade school age to middle school age, they've got like several different timeframes they're juggling, which is what we have now. I think some of the quality of life issues attached to this are significant, but I also feel like, virtually every town in the state, well, I think we can say every town in the state has faced this decision at one time or another. We have not confronted it in decades and decades. I'm cognizant of other things like the firehouse expansions. First of all, those 2 buildings are a lot younger than the buildings we're talking about today. But I feel like education is something, and this quality of the schools has been in our face for quite a while, and we just kind of keep putting it off. I want to look at things like the fact that this town its debt is 1% of its debt limit, and has been for 3 years. Over 10 years, the high was in the 2013, 10 years ago, and it was 4%. We're a very, very frugal town. But, to sort of say, we have no money to invest, folks, unless it's like, a truck or something that's, that's more palatable or more, easy to sort of carve out the cost for. And we just kind of keep putting this bigger decision off and not really, I don't think, factoring in the full value of it. Our bond rating is under Moody's, is a AA3, which is in the high yield category, which basically means we're pretty golden. It's only below prime, which is a AAA. Our debt limit has just been raised another 2 million to close to 62 million. I just think that, when I think about the repairs and the example of, the school, the K-8, not including the auditorium with a waiver is 28.7 million compared to what is today close to 20 million in repairs, but is going to grow every year. It just feels like a pretty simple, this is the moment decision to me. And it feels like that needs to be made by the townspeople who are either going to be living with the schools we have, living with, if the referendum passes, something different, but they get to make the choice. And I think, to me, those are the factors that are pressing me.
Hasn't had an opportunity to speak. Christina?
The only thing I would add to that, though, is we're all gonna have to live with year 4 when we're gonna tell the people, we're raising your taxes by 4 mils, whatever it's gonna be. And we're gonna have to cut all of the operating budgets, and we're gonna have to put off some of these other projects indefinitely, because we're not gonna be able to make it work at all. And probably not be able to pass those budgets. And we don't even have experience with that and how that all goes, because we've been so cautious and careful all of these years, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because now we're at this point where we're at. But it's just scary to me to see it and to think of what's gonna happen just to the whole plan and everything else. So I just want people to understand that's a real thing. And
Mike.
And the other thing we really haven't talked about is.
Jim, just one more, Mike.
I find myself sort of in between agreement on all of these comments. I think this is really expensive. But I've said this multiple times before, and maybe it's beating an old drum, but we're talking about a decision that is a 50 to 100 year decision for this town. Whether it's the new school or not doing the new school, whatever the taxpayers pick, the effects of that decision are potentially a 50 to 100 year decision. That is a bigger deal than any of us have dealt with ever in our tenure as public officials, and probably in our lives in Wellington. A lot of us have lived in Wellington our entire lives. So this not only is a big deal, but of course it's going to be expensive. And I'm not taking that lightly. But the committee spent 2 years gathering good information to be able to put something forward to the taxpayers for them to decide which way they want their town to be going in the next 50 to 100 years. Whether it's spending 20 years paying for an expensive project, or it's 50 years enjoying the fruits of that project, or not spending the money, and then looking at how do we maintain these 2 schools, which all of these, no matter what is decided, is a big, big deal. And big deals are expensive. Big deals are impactful. Even no matter how we slice this, it's expensive and it's impactful. So I don't think the answer is to say, this is a really expensive project, we need to not let the taxpayers decide. Committee made a recommendation, I made the motion because we felt we had done the right research to hand an option to the taxpayers and to ask the taxpayers to decide if they want it or not. And I think it's important, even if we don't like the project, it's important for us to let the taxpayers decide on if they like the project as our ultimate legislative authority. So as much as I hate the cost of this, I also hate ignoring the condition of our current schools, and I hate the idea even more of not letting the taxpayers decide if we're gonna go or no go on this. So that's my feeling about it. I think we have done our research, we get our recommendation to the taxpayers, and let them decide what path they want to take.
And I,
I'm gonna go to Jim and then I'll come back to you. Jim?
I just hope that some of our larger businesses like FedEx and some of that don't look at a 10 mil increase or 10% increase on their assessment and say it's too expensive to do business here. That's my biggest concern. I'm also afraid of a lot of the Wellington taxpayers who just get up and leave. Okay, maybe they're able to get up and leave, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who can't get up and leave because maybe their house is already paid off and they can't afford a 7% mortgage, whatever, to go move somewhere else. So you always have to be mindful of those taxpayers, not only the people, the residents, but I'm also worried about the businesses in this town. FedEx is like one of our largest businesses and taxpayers.
Christina?
yeah, I agree that there's no better way to get feedback from the town than to ask them. And I agree, like, that we should do that. I just also think that we need to get the information out there, because I've talked to so many people just in the past week who don't understand this at all. They don't understand what they're gonna be voting on. So I'm just nervous that, I don't know how to, I mean, we try all the time to get the word out to educate people. And I know that the school building committee spent over backwards to do that. And I think maybe having the vote is the way for people to pay attention. I hope they will. And I hope that they take the time to understand what they're actually voting on too.
You know, all of that, and you know, there's a lot of things in that CIP plan, and we don't know what almost all of the big ticket items would have to go in this similar fashion before taxpayers. So we're talking about, do we not put forth this project because there's gonna be a firehouse project? Do we not put forth this project because there's gonna be something else? Those are all items that our legislative body, which is our taxpayers, are gonna have to decide. And the SBC and the Board of Ed did stay in their lane because that's their job. But they're all fully aware of all of the items outside of that in the town that go into it. But they are tasked with very specific jobs, and they've done those jobs. So I think it's important that while every one of them did the work here and stayed inside that lane, they're aware of what's happening outside and how it affects them, because they're all taxpayers. And they know that. But for us, I struggle with saying we shouldn't give you a firehouse because we're thinking about doing a school, or we shouldn't do a school because we're gonna, build a firehouse, or we're gonna fix these 3 roads, so we can't have any of those things. We have to find some balance of a whole community, and it involves caring for all of that infrastructure, our fire departments, our roads, our schools, and our people. So, I struggle with this project because I feel it's the right thing to do to take this to voters, but the cost is extraordinary. And we can't deny that, but it's not going to get less expensive. We started with a study in 2017 that gave us some preliminary figures. They were in the 40 million. And here we are now in the 60 millions. So the problem isn't going to go away, and the cost isn't going to get less for us. So, and Peter, yes, your question is to recommend, right? And based on that, we will have some work to do. And so you all have to, make those decisions with the information you have. I just feel strongly that that this is the way we hear directly from our taxpayers.
So,
Jeff?
Our board, the Board of Finance, does have a managerial responsibility to look at town finances and look at them very closely. Private citizen Ralph Tool has spent a lot of time on a spreadsheet, which is, I took his offer up to take a look at it. Nothing is perfect, there's no crystal ball. I do have a couple scenarios here, but what has made our town attractive for a long time is our affordable mill rate, but also our consistent mill rate. And that's been attractive to both our residential community and our business. Our budgets are gonna grow about 1.65%, kind of going back about 10 years. So if you factor in just no other, or any of our CIP projects, even our, I'll gladly, anybody can take a look at this. Even with the least expensive option here, at the end of the 20-year note, you're pushing 50 mils.
That's without any grand list modifications, revenue
Well,
increases.
That's
Usually
true.
That's
the
without
reason why I
even
was
loves
focused on
in
the
it.
calculator. I have Ralph's calculator. I appreciate his calculator. I talked with him about it today for an hour and a half.
I don't know how much the grand list will be. That's the thing.
It's just,
That's the
That's the
problem.
problem.
it's
I can say that.
out of what you put in. And we don't know what to put into it to be accurate. So it's isolated to the calculator online is isolated to the cost of the school project because everything else, unless you have a crystal ball, the set of numbers that I know you have in front of you, only.
I mean, to
increase
that also,
revenue increase.
historically, it's not, there's not gonna be 20 businesses moving here.
I get that.
Over, just by the, our zoning, by our everything. So,
But
Jim?
grand list increases, decrease mill rate.
So,
anyway, we have, you can't take any of this like that. And I'm not saying yes or no, but it's our managerial duty to really look at this.
I agree.
And we went through the library about 20 years ago and then did this, and that was $3 million.
But we did nothing else for 20
And that's
years
the thing,
because we borrowed
were
3
warned
million.
about not being our business manager. Believe it or not, it was not always,
I know,
we were warned about that.
right? Jim?
yeah, so one of the things I liked about this sheet you handed out to us, and also Mr. Tulis's spreadsheet, I've seen that kind of rolls things out for 20 years. I think it's good to see that. So and I know, I've attended so many of these school building committee meetings and things like that. I'm sure somebody asked if we can update our online calculator to just roll things out for 20 years so people can see how things flow for 20 years. I remember the request.
The
of
one we
that.
have is 20 years.
Does it?
And it has all of these numbers in it. This is exactly where the
This
numbers
doesn't
came
show on
from.
the slide.
That, right, the slide only showed.
The
that.
slide was clipped
If
off.
you use if you use the tool, it's there for 20 years, because the SBC heard that feedback. And we had the numbers, the cost of
I'm
the
glad it
bond.
does. I'm glad it does.
Yes.
Have we not looked at it yet? Like, even since.
I looked at it a
Serious?
couple times.
Well,
Well, I didn't know when I
Very
put it in, I
serious.
haven't looked at it yet, Jim. I mean, it's just something we're talking about. And to not have gone on and used the calculator and at least seen what it does, it's ridiculous. Instead, you want to rely on something else, that better suits the need. And I don't know, I can't get past that.
Well, I also think it's ridiculous to put this type of thing before town when you can't possibly have a CIP plan that works. There's more things we do. We do more than walk and chew gum. We gotta do multiple things.
I get that. We do.
And so we need to make that decision here,
Not doing anything.
as a joint board, whether we can afford to do that and at the expense of possible other items, right?
But neither should we work off of a calculation that front loads those very same CIP out years into the scenario when those have not been before the voters, when they haven't been anywhere close to the discussion point in the public that the school building project has for the last 2 years intensively, but certainly when I was on the Board of Ed, and all this came through and we grappled with whatever it was, 7 choices and recommended one unilaterally. I mean, it was unanimous. And that was, 2019, 2017. And so, I feel like one of the things that it looks to me like that instead of like focusing on, gee, we've never spent money like this before, is to focus on what is the investment that we need to make in this town to have it grow, flourish, serve its population? That's a more important question to me than what we're talking about now. The model doesn't include Love's. The model doesn't include any other businesses coming in. I think it's not okay to load it up with a lot of projections on year-over-year increases and what's in CIP that has not been before the voters, and not put in some kind of thing like that. And, I don't know how you can call that a full model. So that's why I trust the isolated version that the SBC came up with, because at least, and as Mike has said, isolates it to the kind of purchase that you make with that goal in mind. What does that goal bring you? And what does that cost alone? Like as if you were making a house purchase or a car purchase. And this is the same kind of act of faith in a way that a consumer has to deal with. It's never an easy choice to decide to go for, to buy a house or buy a car, depending on what your stage is. And when you do, that, you have to factor in, what is your presumption? What are all the benefits of that investment? And I would urge us to think of that in totality.
What is the plan for advertising the referendum? But like the date of it and the question, and where would the money to pay for any mailings or information come from? Is it from the school building committee's budget or from, because at this point, whose is it to be in charge of?
So the referendum is the town's, it's a selectmen initiated referendum. So whether or not we could expend town funds and specifically SBC funds, but there's limited information that can go out, right? So we certainly can advertise the time and place. And then we can only have very specific explanatory text. And that will be developed in conjunction with the town clerk and vetted through the town attorney. And that's by both statute and our ordinance that follows that statute. So there will be planning for a mailing that would include not all of, thank you. Not, Kelsey's also back there. Not all of that information would be, it may be able to fit on a postcard like we've been sending out, but I wouldn't know until the explanatory text has been developed.
And that, which budget would that come out of?
So I would say right now the selectmen's budget. And if the cost, about $400 to $600 for a townwide mailing. We use CCM printing service on their every door direct mail, and that was the least expensive version for that size postcard.
On the subject of referendum, it's like, it'll be a full day event, but I've been asked by a number of people if there's any opportunity for non-day or absentee, the ability to weigh in from an absentee perspective or early vote or whatever the case may be.
Great question. So early voting is not a thing in Connecticut as of yet. There's nothing to determine, but this would be an event that would include absentee balloting. So the draft of the motions for tonight, if there's action by the Board of Finance that allows us to get to that step, would be for 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. voting on a date, and from the date after the town meeting, then once the meeting adjourns to referendum, then there would be the opportunity for absentee voting through the town clerk's office. So that is a requirement.
Would that be on any mailers or, information related to that for townsfolk as a part of the mailers, the ability for absentee ballot?
Oh, probably. I can't imagine. It will be in the legal wording. It will be, yes. We're just, what we are is, if we move forward tonight, we enter a blackout period where we can only use it very clear explanatory language, so as not to sway a vote in one direction or another with town funds. And so those things can be included on there, and I assume would be.
I assume we're gonna print up yard signs like we usually do for referendum, and then town puts them around, or
So the registrars could use the signs they have and they just say vote today, or they put them out within the week, so they say like vote Tuesday. So the Wednesday before, they would put signs out around town that would say vote Tuesday, and vote this day. They're not date specific. But yes, would advertise like we would any typical referendum. Like,
Still myself wrestling with the question about the terminology of recommend and my years on the Board of Finance, understanding what the value of that term. People will imply that the board is saying, hey, this is a good idea in recommend, and trying to understand how that plays with different people. And a lot of people also understand that that's really just recommending that the taxpayers make a decision, but there are different interpretations.
It really doesn't read that way when you.
No.
Right, I understand it doesn't. And wrangling with all the stuff we've been talking about, but I guess the one comment I would add to why I think we should be pushing this forward to the taxpayers is that if we use the few votes we have here to not send it to the taxpayers, then we are actually making a decision for the taxpayers, which we are technically empowered to do, but we're making the decision that they not only can't, if they want the project, they can't vote on it. We're also lining them up to, in all likelihood, be paying to work on the existing schools. And if the majority of the taxpayers don't want to do that, we're making that decision for them, because then if we don't go forward right now, then there are only a couple options of what can happen. Either the SBC can go back and look at whether they make changes and try to come up with a new project, but we can't get our square footage much smaller because we run out of space and we start cutting the programs we're delivering now. So that doesn't seem real likely. Probably the likely thing, or at least a lot of people in town are talking about, is, well, let's just do the repairs to the schools. Then we don't get the operational savings. And then if we look at it from the viewpoint of the less expensive project, we're saying instead of you paying $28 million to get a new school with a full waiver and not an auditorium, you're going to spend 2/3 of that, $19 million, to keep the two existing schools. We're basically setting up the taxpayers for that to be the path, the likely path. So I don't think we should insert our choice in place of the taxpayers. I think we should get it to the taxpayers, and people should communicate. The official channels should communicate what the question is. And there are lots of other channels that communicate, that are legitimate ways of communicating. People who have a certain feeling about it can gather their people together and get it to the taxpayers so that they choose if they want the 2/3 cost to fix the old schools, or if they want to go for the full vote for the new school and the auditorium, whatever it is that the taxpayers feel is the appropriate choice. I think we shouldn't insert our choice for them.
Pete, I struggle with the recommend part, right? It's, and then our typical process, even the budget process, or we bring a CIP item that has to go to town meeting. It's the motion that before the Board of Finance is recommend that the Board of Selectmen call a town meeting to appropriate X dollars. So I struggled with, why don't these resolutions use that similar language? Because that's what you would be recommending, right? Is that it be moved to another body to call a meeting of the legislative body. It's just not how they're written, but that is the process, because the Board of Selectmen cannot make that next step without the recommendation of the Board of Finance. So it's interestingly crafted language. It doesn't.
It doesn't say we're recommending that this move
No,
forward.
no,
It
you're
says, we are recommending this.
Can I
appropriate.
just jump in on that, though? That's the exact same language we use for the library bond.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's
No,
the same language every single time.
I know, well, I mean, I definitely, I'm all about the language. I can see your point easily. I think so, definitely. I think that the advice we're getting about legal language, though, sort of sets the course to not have the vote of the people if it comes to that challenge
Yeah, and so
legally. So to me, that's,
all of the motions you have before you, so Board of Finance, you have motions that are relative to your board, and Board of Selectmen, you have the items relative to this board. And all of those were drafted by our bond counsel. It's the same bond counsel who drafted the language in 2003 for the library bond, in 1997 for the ADA compliance work, excuse me, that was done. So this is, someone, there is history there with the town and the process. And so it's, again, making sure that we have done all of the things we need to do in order to legally bring about this option. We don't want to ever bring something before the townspeople that we don't have the authority to do. So the language has been drafted by council as is appropriate and historically done. All right, so I will, yes, Pete.
I just read the last line here and going by language, says this, the resolution was approved by blank votes in favor and blank votes opposed.
Well,
There's no option here to reject it. The way the language is written, we're gonna go with the language. That's-
what you're seeing in front of you, the draft motions are
Yeah.
how they would appear in the minutes. So that's, you're seeing the language in that form, that's all. But the motion would be the resolution in the center. This would be information that would be put into the minutes. If the motion is made, seconded, passed or failed.
I made that twice.
So if we have no other discussion specifically on the project, then I will move forward to.
I do
Christina? Yeah.
have one question. So once this is done, either way, let's say we vote to move it forward, when does the blackout period start? And what does that mean for all of us as individuals on what we can say and can't say?
So the language talks about extending town funds. So within your, so it starts once the meetings are called, and that would be potentially in item 8 of this meeting. So I would say, following this meeting, that blackout period would begin. And what would be official would be the explanatory text.
Mhm.
So when you're at town meeting, board meetings, and the information we're pushing out, it wouldn't be your opinion or his opinion or my opinion. It is simply, we wouldn't use the information systems at either the school or the town to push out a go vote in favor of this, go vote against this. Can't use anything to sway. The explanatory text is very bland, for lack of a better word, adjective, so that you are giving just the information folks need. You cannot sway them. We as a town cannot use our funds to sway people to vote yes or to vote no. And that blackout period begins once the town meeting referendum are called, and they're called in one morning. It could potentially be tonight.
So what can we do outside on our own as private citizens?
Whatever
The
you
rest
want.
of the question.
Yeah.
That was.
I'm telling you what you
agree.
can do
I'm
with
just
town
asking,
funds.
so it's on the record.
Right.
I
So
want, I'm
we
saying so it's
cannot
on the record.
expend town funds. I think
Well, yeah,
that is, yes.
speaking personally with no affiliation, if you boards or commissions.
I would refrain from doing that in a public meeting, most certainly. That we are all members of boards, and there's no way for that to not be present and not be part of the work that we do. So, but what you,
I'm just anticipating someone saying, oh, you're on the Board of Finance and the Board of Finance recommended this, so you must, tell me all the reasons why. So I can picture someone saying that. And then I have to explain, well, the language we had to use was the specific language, and it didn't necessarily mean that we're recommending it. We were recommending that it went to a vote, like all of that.
Could refer people to the minutes of the meeting. That might be
Right.
helpful.
Yeah.
yeah.
But you're saying you
And the
would
text
feel
of the project.
precluded from.
Well, I don't know how
Explanation.
much we can talk about it,
Yeah,
how much,
that's a good question.
what we should, I just don't know.
You're not
Again,
expending town funds.
That's what it comes down to,
Right,
spending
so-
town funds. And so when we're sitting at the table in a meeting in a town office building and using town office equipment, those are expending funds, right? So at the table is very different than the conversation you have at home and you have with,
Friends and
folks.
neighbors on the
That's
street.
correct.
Your large circle
That
of
is,
friends.
you are certainly entitled to have your voice.
Or the internet.
As far as official communications, the project will have explanatory text. And that will be, again, done in conjunction with the school building committee and it will be very specific to the project, again, not leaning in one direction, and it has to go through an attorney to make sure that, we follow that. And we've been given examples, and we have examples of the last explanatory text we had. Well, this last vote, there was one on explanatory text on the constitutional question. And then in our own local referendums, there's explanatory text on the solar project out of Region 19. So, and you know, you can direct people towards that. If we're in a meeting, that's where I would direct people from in my official capacity.
Okay.
Okay. It does seem very convoluted and, you know, ask those questions, trying to make sure that we, you know, do everything the right way to give folks full confidence in the work that we've done in getting their vote on the record. All right, so Jim, did you?
Yeah, well, no,
Yeah,
since we're gonna go into blackout period.
It's not till after we do these things.
Correct, but it's the question that I'm just hanging out there, Mike, if we have any movement on the budget breakdown that I've been asking for 3 weeks for the board, I think it's, you know, kind of a details, a summary at a high level.
Well, what you have is what you have for now, which is all that information, just not in the.
shared with anybody here who actually, you know, has to make that analysis. It seems like the work of a half an hour, and I'm honestly speaking candidly, I'm very.
I know, I know, but as I've said to you before, there is a ton of stuff that we're doing. There's a ton of work that we're doing behind the scenes. And this, I'll be blunt, this is just not my highest priority. I've got SBC business all day long. I sit at my computer all day long trying to keep up with things that are on time schedule and breaking down that thing in a different way. I can't prioritize it right now. I'm trying to get to it.
It's not.
And
breaking down,
it's
but you
billable
feel like
hours
it's-
for our consultant that
I get that,
I'm using him for other things.
It's the work of a half an hour by Scott, and it's something
Yes.
that would have been important for this board of finance, I feel, to have that in front of them.
Well, it's,
Particularly as a time sensitive, since we're.
Okay, if I can, are we talking about the breakdown of cost of the construction project?
Project costs, just so that validation that, you know, and I agree with you, I'm privy to that number, you know, to the breakdown through the SBC privately. So I understand that it is grounded in present day construction realities.
I have asked
I'm
for it,
frustrated.
but when I'm loading the consultant with all sorts of work, I'm getting what I can get as it comes.
I want to make one more comment on the motions that you have before you for both the building project and then the additional question, which would be the referendum. We've seen the cost at just over $60 million for a new school on a new site. The number you're going to have within your motions is more than that, is $62,740,000. And I know I've shared this with you all before. I want to make sure everyone understands. If you have any questions, that includes the cost of borrowing. Doesn't mean we're going to bond that cost. It means in order to do so or to consider it, it has to be appropriated. And so it has to be part of the question. There has historically, it has happened in Wellington. We've added those costs into the whole process. So talking again with Donna, our business manager, the decision hasn't been made to do that, but we cannot do it unless it's asked for in an appropriation. And so that comes into some of the CIP things Christina has talked about with her committee. And do we ramp up to the big hit? Or do we just kind of there at that clip? And so you can, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but in order to allow the town options, it needs to be appropriated. So to the folks who are listening to this meeting and all of you, the cost of the project did not change to $62 million. From the $60 million, that construction cost is the same. This includes the cost of borrowing notes. I think cost of the bond.
And it's the gross amount that doesn't include the usual cost sharing with the state on school projects.
It's not reimbursable. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is the total project cost, not the final amount we're going to bond. It is the amount, the total amount we would need to borrow to actually complete the job. So
Project costs.
Before
reimbursement. And that's what that is. And the numbers you're seeing after reimbursement are what we expect the bond to be and what we actually bond. And that's why you're seeing $28 million to $43 million. But the requirement, we have to have access to those funds in order to do construction. And that's why the question is the full cost of the project. Right. So If there's no other discussion on item 4, I will move to item 5, which is Board of Finance action to recommend appropriation of borrowing for a pre-K through 8 school, and the 3 of us will sit back.
I would like to put on the table the motion for discussion. Resolve that the Board of Finance, having reviewed the proposed PK through 8 school project, hereby recommends that the town of Wellington appropriate $62,740,000 to fund the costs related to the design, acquisition, construction, equipping, and furnishing of a new approximately 76,680 square foot pre-kindergarten through grade 8 school to be centrally located within the town, and related site improvements and work, including the acquisition of land and or rights or interest in land on which to locate the new school, referred to as the pre-K through 8 school project, and that the town issue its serial bonds or notes and temporary notes in an amount not to exceed $62,740,000 to finance said appropriation.
Second for discussion.
Discussion.
Everyone just been
Are you
discussing.
discussed out?
Yeah.
I should ask if the alternates want to weigh in.
I didn't see Lisa, but Jim is on.
The alternates can offer points of discussion anytime.
No comment, Steph.
Thanks, Jim.
I'm here too. I'm under Stu, but I have no comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Last call. Hearing no more discussion. I think we should probably take a roll call vote, shouldn't we? Is Kelsey the one to do that?
I'll do it. Oh, go ahead, Kelsey.
Christina? Peter?
No.
Jeff?
No.
Jim?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Steph?
Yes. Motion carried 4-2. The second motion is a second question on the, would be a second question on the referendum. Resolved that the Board of Finance, having reviewed the proposed auditorium project, hereby recommends the town appropriate an additional $5,935,000 if the pre-K through 8 school project is approved by the town to fund the cost related to the design, construction, equipping, and furnishing of an approximately 8,000 square foot auditorium at such new pre-K through 8 school, and that the town issue its serial bonds or notes and temporary notes in an amount not to exceed $5,935,000 to finance said additional appropriation.
I'll second again. Seconded.
Discussion?
Yeah,
Pete?
now that item 1 is passed, item 2 is an additional big bite. And based on the discussion we've already had tonight, I can't possibly justify it.
Anyone else?
I think it's valuable to put forward to the voters for the same reason we put forward the primary. There was.
Except we're not putting forward, we're recommending. to the
Correct,
voters.
recommending for a vote by the town again. I get it. That's why we broke it out. Why the school building committee didn't, like, I would not have voted for that as the only option to this town. But it was broken out as a separate project specifically, at least in my mind, for that because of the concerns about the impact. But there is a significant interest, or there was a significant interest expressed in all of the surveys and all of the data and all the feedback we got of those that wanted the new school. They wanted to see the auditorium. And that was people that wanted a hall renovation as the option instead of a new school, new site. It was for both. I understand, I get it.
I know in your discussion there, among those who are in favor of a new school, I just think that this is a huge bite, and I absolutely cannot recommend this book.
And I can understand that opinion.
Can I ask a question? Actually, it's a question for Donna. So the auditors, just as of today, said that we could borrow up to 61 million or 59.
61 million.
So this puts us closer if everything's approved to 70 million. Although a lot of it's gonna be reimbursed, so it isn't going to get to the 60 million threshold. But on paper, it is well, even just the first one, it is exceeding what the auditors say. So I just don't really understand that.
So the debt limitation statute is net of reimbursement. So you are not getting close to your 62 million, are you? Because you're
Right.
it's
Some amount would be reimbursed. I wish that it was the net numbers that were in these questions, not the full, because we already, if we got no reimbursement, then we're holding the bag. And we can't even borrow that much. Not that would ever happen.
But I would like to point out though that well, first of all, the statute is what Donna just said, the statute is written in such a way that it's the net amount. But I was actually going to ask one of you guys to comment on that.
So to your
Can I do
point,
that?
yeah, in the next set of motions by the Board of Selectmen, that there is language that specifically gives those amounts not to exceed numbers to finance appropriation or such as may be necessary after deducting grants to be received for the project. So in my mind, if we didn't get a grant, we wouldn't be doing what taxpayers could possibly say yes to. Right, we wouldn't move forward with $60 million school if we didn't get a grant, because the language will be after a grant. So, but we have to borrow the funds in order to do the construction and then get the
Right.
reimbursement back. So we have to ask for the full amount, just like all of the other projects we do. We have to ask for the full amount from taxpayers. And then the net is what we actually borrow.
And that discussion was at the February 16th meeting, when we first had the presentation. That point was made by both Eric as a select woman and Phil about revisiting, that basically there would be nothing binding that would go forward at that larger number if we were to not get reimbursement. But it was also my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, that the reimbursement, the state's share of the reimbursement is not something that's a long shot ever, or there's not any history to point at where the state reneged on its basic reimbursement of a new school build project in the state. So, we're having to do these numbers in the grossed up fashion that we are, but it's not a situation where the state would renege on that and we would be stuck with something that we don't feel we can afford. So if we're talking about the debt ceiling, and that's only for the school portion of our debt limit, there's another 30 million for general purposes and others under different categories for sewers and different things like that. We would be, even if we did not get the square footage waiver and we went with the worst case scenario option and we didn't get that waiver, it's 43 million. The auditorium, that's with the auditorium. So that's 2/3 of the debt limit for only the school portion. I mean, roughly. I just want to put that in that context. Oh, Pete?
I just once again want to point out that it's a debt limit, not a debt goal.
Duly noted. Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none. Let's vote.
Christina,
Yes.
Peter,
No.
Jeff,
No.
Jim,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes 4-2. No abstentions. Now, I think we should defer, thank you, everyone. Defer to you for the, thank you. Item 7.
All right, so Board of Selectmen, item 7 is Board of Selectmen action to approve resolutions for pre-K through 8 school and auditorium. You have in front of you the first single sheet is potential action, and the full bond resolutions, one for a pre-K through 8 school and one for auditorium, that can be considered after Board of Finance action. So the motions can be made, the motion can be made, and then the waiving of the entire resolution. The reading of the entire resolution can be waived, but included in the minutes. So we could either read the 3 full pages of text or waive the full bond resolution, and it must be included, it would still be included in the minutes of our meeting.
Can I just ask a clarifying
Of
question?
course you may.
So what you're saying is if we waive the reading, we're still reading everything on
That
these
is
two
correct.
here, but we're waiving reading 1, 2,
2 pages each,
2
Yes.
pages of each, so there's 4 more pages.
yes.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
the-
and we are confirmed that this is a legal way of doing this
Absolutely,
because this is voluminous, is not typically read.
correct.
Okay.
But it must be included. There's the full bond resolution, so it has, so the language in each of the resolutions, there is, and I encourage you each to look at, we can discuss the bond. The process by which to issue bonds, the authority by which to issue bonds. This is identical to our historic past practice with one exception. If you look in the full bond package under item D and F, where it speaks to who is authorized, the language used to be the majority of selectmen, because we don't have a charter, we don't have an ordinance that speaks to anything else. The majority of the selectmen and the treasurer of the town has been changed, not by myself, I asked this very question, but changed to the first selectman and the treasurer. And bond council in general, and I don't mean ours, I mean bond councils across the state, have moved that language to not a majority of selectmen, because the time in which the actions would need to be taken in the days you would be issuing bonds would need to happen over the course of a very short period of time, and, several hours apart, including the buying of the notes and the selling of the notes, and then the signing of the paperwork associated to that. And so the thought process when I said, oh, can we change that back to the selectmen was that, that typically can't happen in that time frame. It can be very, it was challenging at best, and not in Wellington, but in general. So this language was changed by
In
bond
the industry.
council in the industry as a whole. So those were the only large changes from what we have historically done in the past.
How do we turn this into a motion?
So if you would like to make a motion, it would be from here,
The whole thing?
nope, to, it would end here, because that's the next item.
Okay. So I would start right here.
You would say, I
Right
move
here.
the following resolution.
I move now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Selectmen that the following resolutions, the full text of each of which is attached hereto, are hereby approved. Resolution appropriating $62,740,000 to fund the costs related to the design, acquisition, construction, equipping, and furnishing of a new approximately 76,680 square foot pre-K through grade 8 school to be centrally located within the town, including the acquisition of land and/or rights or interests in land, and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $62,742,000 to finance the appropriation or so much as may be necessary after deducting grants to be received for the project. Resolution appropriating an additional $5,935,000 if the new pre-K through grade 8 school is approved to fund the costs related to the design, construction, equipping, and furnishing of an approximately 8,000 square foot auditorium at such new school, and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $5,935,000 to finance the appropriation or so much as may be necessary after deducting grants to be received for the project. And the reading of the full text of each such resolution is hereby waived. That action on the aforesaid resolutions for the new pre-K through 8 school and auditorium projects is hereby designated for submission to the voters at a referendum to be held on March 28, 2023, between the hours of 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. at the town office building, 40 Old Farms Road, Connecticut, in the manner provided by section 7-7 of the General Statutes of Connecticut, following consideration of each resolution at a special town meeting to be held at 7 p.m. on March 14, 2023 at Hall Memorial School. That the aforesaid resolutions for the new pre-K through 8 school project and the auditorium project shall be placed upon the ballots under the following headings respectively. Shall the town of Wellington appropriate $62,740,000 to fund costs related to the design, acquisition, construction, equipping, and furnishing of a new pre-K through 8 grade 8 school to be centrally located within the town, including the acquisition of land and/or rights or interests in land, and authorize the issuance of bonds and notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $62,740,000 to finance the appropriation or so much as may be necessary after deducting grants to be received for the project? Question mark. And shall the town of Wellington appropriate an additional $5,935,000 if the new pre-K through grade 8 school is approved to fund the costs related to the design, construction, equipping, and furnishing of an auditorium at such new school, and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $5,935,000 to finance the appropriations or so much as may be necessary after deducting grants to be received for the project? Question.
Well, second, will you accept a friendly amendment in the first paragraph? The second reading of 62 million should be $62,740,000. You said 742,000.
I'm sorry, I will accept your friendly amendment. The second time I said that should have been $62,740,000.
We don't add any dollars. But we don't.
That's not.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Jim, Mike? All
vote. Kelsey?
Jim,
No.
Mike,
Yes.
Erica,
Yes. Motion passes. Item 8, Board of Selectmen action to submit resolutions for pre-K through 8 school and auditorium to referendum vote and setting date for consideration at special town meeting and approving the form of the warning and notice of special town meeting and referendum. You have attached the legal notice and warning. It is 2 pages, the third pages are signing, and so I will move the following resolution, be it resolved by the Board of Selectmen that the attached warning and notice of special town meeting and referendum is hereby approved.
Second.
Right, so discussion. Typically, we read our legal warning. So to say I questioned this was a lot. All of the language in here as presented is exactly how it will be included attached to the minutes and warned in the Willamette Chronicle is the plan for it to be warned, and that's how it will read outside. So
It's exactly the same as what I just read also, right?
no, there's some additional language
okay.
in the items to discuss. There's more, it drills down on some of the
Okay.
bond resolution items, but the questions you see at the end are, and this, the resolution you can see, if you turn over to the back of page 2, the town meeting call will specifically give you the questions as they will appear on the ballot. It will offer 2 items for discussion on each of the 2 projects, the new school, and then the additional appropriation for the auditorium. Item 3 is adjourning the meeting at its conclusion to the referendum for March 28th. It goes on to tell you where electors are qualified to vote, and will say absentee ballots will be available from the town clerk's office. So I think that went to Mr. Marshall's concern that people would know they could get absentee ballots. I think it's important to note the time frame for a referendum is no more than 14, no less than 7 days. We left this at 14 days so as to allow ample opportunity for folks to receive an absentee ballot. So there will certainly be some challenges if someone is overseas. I just don't think there would be enough time for them, but certainly if we cut it to the 7 days time, it would not give folks, even less opportunity. So we went with a full 14 days, and that's why you'll see a time frame. And unlike our typical meetings where once the town meeting happens, then there is another legal warning that goes out for the referendum. This all happens as of this date, and the blackout period would begin immediately following positive vote. Any discussion on the motion? All right, I will call for a vote.
Jim,
No.
Mike,
Yes.
Erica,
Yes. Motion carries. Also, thank you for coming in. Sounds like you're feeling. All right. That brings us to the end of our actionable items and brings us to present to speak. So if you are present to speak, I ask you to identify yourself for the record and limit your comments to 2 minutes. Is there anyone in the room present to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Robin Campbell, town clerk. I just need you guys to sign that, the legal notice.
Thank you, Robin.
And thank you.
All right, anyone else in the room present to speak? Seeing none. Mr. Tella online.
Hey, Nick Tello, 49 Myrtle. First, just want to start off with disappointed. The present to speak was not in the beginning. I understand that was a tactful move, and it was well played. Good job. Disappointed in the members tonight with the Board of Finance. They are supporting the project without the SBC having done their job in gathering important costs with the hall and center, which was part of their charge, and they failed to do that. Their excuse is that they're still working on it. Operational costs are, even though they've been working on this for 10 years or more, operational costs are as unknown as Ralph's calculator, because people love to poke holes at that. But the speculation, 440,000 in salaries, getting rid of a principal with a pay of approximately 115,000, secretary staff of either center or hall going away is approximately $90,000, bringing that to approximately 200,000. That other is going to have to either getting rid of a teacher, a nurse, or multiple teachers, which the Board of Education, I believe, has to support if we're going to get rid of teachers, which it seems that would have to happen. Mike stated that the research was done, and that is factually just not true. Because if that was true, then we would know the cost to center and hall. Found James' comments about buildings 20 to 30 years old start to have repair expenses becoming too costly at times, and implying we could be potentially looking at a new school in 30 years. I find it completely unethical that Erica not only has not excused herself still on this project, but was actively negotiating her family's property with the town. That is fact. The fiscally responsible path would have been to do the repairs that was neglected by the town in segments, not 20 million at a shot, maybe 3 million, 5 million here and there until it was done. Sadly, now people are potentially going to have to move from Wellington after their families haven't been here for decades in some family situations because of this reckless move. While other families with kids in the school have to decide if it makes sense to even stay in town. Now that the mill rate will be 40 plus soon enough. Who moves to a town with a high mill rate when surrounding towns have a lower one and offer more services? I just don't see this being beneficial to the town overall. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else online present to speak?
Hi, it's Elizabeth Wolf. Can you hear me?
Yes, Lisa.
Oh, I just want to say that I'm so excited about having a new school. It's been a long time. The families have come forward. You all have done a great job putting together the proposal. I, who have lived in town for 27 years, find this to be a very exciting moment. And I welcome the responsible growth and all the new people that will come to town. And I wish all the people that are going to move out the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Ms. Cunningham?
Hi, Michelle Doucette Cunningham, 41 Liska Road. I want to thank both of the boards tonight for allowing the taxpayers to make this choice in the next few weeks, because your vote tonight was not for or against a school. It was about whether or not the taxpayers should make this decision. Boards have been working very hard on this for many years, and now it's up for the taxpayers to decide. And I'm very disappointed for those of you who voted against it, trying to stop the project as your only way to stop the project. In reality, you should have let the taxpayers decide. You're always saying, oh, let everyone choose, let everybody vote on it. But you really didn't follow that lead tonight, and I'm disappointed in that. But I'm happy with the result. And like Lisa, who spoke before me, I'm very excited about the possibility that we might invest in the future of Wellington. And I think that this really has tremendous potential. I really like the analogy tonight of buying a family van to fit everybody, or 2 older cars that you're going to fix up, because that's what this feels like. And I'd rather not have to open up my old vehicles to see what might be a problem if I have to repair them, and would much rather invest in the long-term investment of having a reliable vehicle for the long run. So thank you all for your vote tonight to allow the taxpayers to decide at the town referendum.
Thank you. Anyone else online present to speak? Anyone online? Anyone else in the room? Ms. Newcomb.
Elaine Newcomb, 28 Fairview Road. My first concern is for the location in terms of the safety of access and egress. I don't see it as a good site. I know remember being told that there would be a traffic study. It seems to me that that kind of should have been before a site is even selected to make sure it would be considered safe. The bottom of Fisher Hill Road is unusable. Glass Factory is not really up to accommodating school buses plus other vehicles. And coming from the village down 32, it is not until one is absolutely right in front of Hilltop that one can see if anything is oncoming from the other direction on 32. I don't see how that is going to be successfully mitigated. And I think that square one is the safe transport to a school and access to it. Also factoring in, there'll be private cars, not just school buses, going in and out of there. The taxpayers, this is a taxpayer decision, and that's where it should be.
Thank you. All right, last call for anyone online. All right, I will just clarify a comment that was made earlier. There has been no new school determined. This is, these were items that will be put forth to referendum, so I think it's important to know this was one step in a process to give taxpayers the vote. So seeing no further business before us, I move to adjourn at 8:30.
Second.
All those in favor?
We all voted this.
Yes. Jim,
Jointly.
you need to sign that. The last page.
I need to.
You do. So a decision of the board is a decision of the board. Not reflective of the vote. Individual. That's the problem. I think she did, that's why, yeah.